Hey everyone, welcome back to Cowboy Survival. I'm Richard, and today we're going to talk about survival planning for events that are likely to occur. In a previous video, I talked about planning for the event of a natural disaster. Today we're going to talk about planning for another lockdown from a pandemic. The first thing I want to do, however, is recognize our veterans. I'm filming this on Veterans Day, and I wanted to let everyone out there know who has served that I deeply appreciate your service. I never had the opportunity to serve myself, but that doesn't mean I don't respect the work that you did and the role that you played in helping to preserve our great, great country. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I've got some memorabilia here. This is a Purple Heart that was won by my mother's uncle at the Battle of Peleliu back in World War II. This is a flag that my daughter picked up when she visited Hawaii a couple of years ago. This flag is actually flown over the USS Arizona Memorial. My wife actually has a flag that recently she was able to raise herself over the USS Constitution in Boston. And this hat I have is from when I visited the World War II Museum in New Orleans last year. So I believe very much in our country. I support our country, and I want to thank all of the veterans for the hard work and the wonderful service that you provided. With that, let's get into our topic for the day. As I indicated a few moments ago, this video is going to be about planning for the next pandemic. And key to that phrase, that topic, is that I do believe there will be another pandemic at some point. This nation, it's inevitable. First of all, the contagious pathogens are out there, whether it's something we already know about, like maybe another version of COVID or Ebola or something, or a new pathogen that we haven't seen yet. The reality is that a new pathogen will arise. It will affect somebody somewhere in the world, and that pathogen, that disease, will come to America. I believe that with all my soul. Now, why do I believe that? And I think it's important for you to understand why I believe that in order to take this video seriously. So, I have a theory that friction is a great tool for reducing the likelihood of danger. It mitigates risk. Now, what is friction? So let me read you the dictionary definition right out of Webster's. Friction is the resistance that one surface or object encounters when moving over another. Okay, so friction, we know what friction is. We rub our hands together, we get heat, right? We've seen people use bow systems to make a fire because that's about friction and it creates heat. In an economic sense, we can talk about friction, things like tariffs, embargoes, inspections on incoming goods, paperwork. All that stuff creates friction that slows down the process. We know the government is trying to slow down the proliferation of firearms by creating barriers such as documentation and permits and those kind of things. They do that because it creates friction. It slows down that process. By the same token, the movement of people from one place to another can be slowed down by the barriers that are put in place. Whether that friction is in the form of visas that we issue to people, whether it's in the form of controls at the borders, such as border crossings and inspections. It might be things like special passports or special permits that people might have. It might be quotas that the government establishes on who can come, how many people can come from which countries in the world. That kind of friction will slow things down. We know that, for instance, when we see Ebola outbreaks in countries in Africa, the government suddenly puts into place restrictions that slow the process of people moving from those locations to America. It might be in the form of not allowing planes to come in. It sometimes is in the form of people having to isolate or quarantine before they're allowed into the general public. In New Zealand, during COVID-19, a friend of mine had his daughter and her family moved to New Zealand. And when they got there, they had to quarantine for about a month, if I recall, before they could mingle with the general population. So that's all friction. We exist today in a day of very little friction. We know what happens at the southern border. People are coming across our southern border literally by the hundreds of thousands every single month. Nobody knows who they are. Nobody knows where they're going. Nobody's checking them for possible diseases. It's a disaster. We don't know anything about what's happening in our northern border because the government has pulled a lot of the northern border agents out of that region and put them down south, where unfortunately it's not doing much good. We know in the European Union, you can travel from any country in the European Union to another country without any checks whatsoever. No passports, no visas, no border checkpoints, nothing. Until recently, Americans could travel to any country in Europe without a visa. So we don't have a lot of friction in the processes that move people from one to another. Now, another definition of friction is the conflict that occurs when you've got one process conflicting with another, running into another process. That can create problems, and we know that. People get angry if they're not allowed to go where they want to go when they want to go there. And so our country has decided, for better or worse, that to avoid those kind of feelings, those kind of negative anxieties, they've decided to have no restrictions whatsoever. Well, those people coming in carry with them disease and pathogens in many cases. Not all of them, of course. That'd be silly to say that, but some of them do carry that. And we have no way of knowing who's got a contagion and who doesn't. So I do believe that another pandemic is going to occur. And that's why I think this preparation process in this video is important. So I'm going to talk about the things we don't need to really worry about in a pandemic lockdown, those things we do need to worry about in a pandemic lockdown, and then I'll present a short list of things that I think you ought to have on hand. I'm sure I'll leave something off the list. I'll get comments. That's okay. So with that, let's start talking about the things that I'm not worried about during a pandemic lockdown. So what am I not worrying about? Well, first of all, I'm not going to worry about the electrical grid. Okay, we know that even during the last pandemic, people identified as essential personnel still worked. And part of that is going to be our electrical workers, and by the way, also the people working with our water system. So electric and water will likely still work. There's always a chance of interruptions, and for example, parts could be hard to get if there is a breakdown, if there is a breakdown in the supply chain, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm not really worried about the electric or the water. We didn't have to worry about it last time. I'm not going to worry about it this time. I'm not going to worry about natural gas. I think that will continue to flow. I'm not going to worry about the medical system. I think the medical system will still operate. Now, there's always the danger that hospitals can get full, and so it might be hard to find a bed in a hospital. We'll see hospitals limit elective surgery, which we saw during the last pandemic. But I also don't know of anybody who needed hospital care and didn't get it. I think in most cases people were able to get the essential immediate care that they needed. I'm not real worried about the government. I think the government will continue to function. The government may take on some powers, try to take on some powers that they shouldn't, as we saw in the last pandemic. I don't think that they are looking at it as an opportunity to control people. Honestly, I don't think the people in our government are that smart. But I do think that they will try to do their best, even though they will make many, many mistakes. And of course, what we know politicians do, right? They make a mistake, and then rather than admit it, they try to defend it. They try to rationalize that what they did was the right thing after all, even though they might even know it was the wrong thing. What else am I not going to worry about? I'm not going to necessarily worry about roving bands of marauders. That doesn't sound very, very likely to me. It didn't happen during the last pandemic. It probably won't happen during this one. I'm not going to worry about the internet. I think the internet will still function. Pandemic is not going to affect satellites, and it's not going to affect, as I said, the electrical grid, I don't believe. It's going to affect you and me, but it's not going to affect those things. I'm not particularly concerned about food, though food could be a problem if the supply chain is interrupted. Other than that, I think most of our essential functions will continue to operate, but there are going to be some things we do have to worry about, and let's talk about those next. So let's talk about the things that I do believe I need to prepare for. They basically fall into two categories: supply chain issues and medical issues. Now, as I said before, I don't really believe that the hospitals are going to shut down. I don't believe that we're going to lose access to medical care. I do think it's possible that some of that access may be limited. Beds may fill up with pandemic patients. We may see things like elective surgeries being delayed or not allowed. There could be a problem if the medical personnel are getting sick at high rates because of the pathogens and the pandemic. So that could limit our access to those people who deliver the health care. I think there's things you can do to prepare for that. I think, first of all, we all need to be healthy. We need to continually strive to make ourselves healthy, eat right, keep our sugar down, keep our cholesterol down, exercise, do the things the doctors are telling us to do now so that problems don't get worse in a pandemic. To the extent possible, have a small stockpile of medications at home. Don't wait until your medications are down to 1 or 2 pills to go renew them. As soon as you can renew a prescription, go ahead and renew it and get you that supply that you need. There are places online like jace.com where you can actually buy a small supply of antibiotics to keep on hand. And then as you get antibiotics from your doctor, you rotate those into the bottles that you get from Jace and you use the ones in Jace so that nothing ever expires. So that's a good solution if you're wanting to maintain some antibiotics at your home. Insulin could be a problem for those of us who are diabetic. We have to think about ways to help our body to not have as much sugar in it. So we're going to have to really be careful during a pandemic to watch our intake of carbs and sugars to keep our sugar levels as low as possible, and maybe stretch our insulin a little bit. So I think the medical issues are there. They're manageable, but we just have to think about those ahead of time. Supply chain issues are something that's more or less not in our control. I don't believe there's going to be a huge problem with this. We all ran out and bought a whole bunch of this during the last pandemic. I don't think that's necessary. All the production people said they were making the same amount of toilet paper they always did. People just panicked and went out and bought 400 rolls of it and stuck it in their garage because they didn't know when they were going to need. We didn't buy food. People didn't buy lots and lots of. They bought toilet paper. Really? Okay. I do think it's wise to always have a supply of the things you're going to need, whatever those are. If you've got a child, you're going to need a supply of diapers, a supply of baby formula on hand. If you've got issues that you need toilet paper, make sure you've got enough toilet paper to last you for a little while. Paper towels is always a good thing to have. Cleaners, disinfectants, and those kind of things are good to have. But I don't think we have to go out and buy a year's supply. As I said, I'm talking about disasters that are going to be short in duration and localized in the nature of these events. So there's going to be supplies, and it may be difficult to get them, but you're going to get what you need. I think that it's important to think about things like gasoline. The problem with the supply chain of gasoline is not the producer of the oil. Well, it could be, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I think one of the real problems is the trucking system that delivers gasoline to gas stations. I think the trucking system will still work, but there's a possibility that those people who drive the trucks will be impacted by the pandemic, so we'll have less truck drivers available to drive those trucks. Remember, trucks require specialized skills and a specialized license to drive those things. I think the fuel could be affected by a supply issue, only to the extent that we've become, as a result of natural energy production restrictions in the United States, we've become more and more dependent upon foreign oil over the past couple of years. To the extent, and that oil is all delivered to us by seagoing vessels, which require crews. To the extent that the crews are impacted by a worldwide pandemic, we may see that ships aren't running as often as they used to. Which also means the workers at the oil terminals are going to have to be up to speed. The workers in the oil fields are going to have to be healthy and at work. To the extent that they can't go to work, the oil can't get pumped. If the people at the oil terminals can't pump the oil into tankers, if there's no crew to man those tankers across the oceans, no crew to unload them, nobody to run the refineries, that's where we run into fuel problems. I don't know if that's going to be a real issue, but it is something to think about. So I would say, if you're really concerned about that, get a couple of jerry cans of gasoline and keep them at the house. But remember, gasoline will go bad, so you don't want to keep it too long. You want to rotate that out. Right? I think having tanks of propane at the house, if you cook a lot on the grill, propane can be a great tool. Some of you actually have propane that heats your house. So you may want to make sure you have plenty of that on hand. I'd say having 4 to 6 tanks of propane at your home is not unreasonable. For a disaster, those tanks will last you a while and would probably get you through any kind of localized pandemic issues that relate to quarantining. I think other things to think about. Food is something to think about. There are some food things that are going to be hard to get. Having a supply of powdered milk and powdered eggs might be good because milk and eggs might get hard to find, right? I think that I would not stock in a lot of meat because if there's an electrical issue, and remember I said I don't think there will be, but if there were an electrical issue, the freezers that you have are not going to necessarily work all the time. All that meat could go bad, particularly if you live in an environment that is non-Arctic in climate. Speaking of electricity, some of you might decide to have on hand a generator. Now, you can put in those things like the Generac generators, which can cost, $12,000 to $15,000 and run off natural gas. As long as the natural gas works and the electric works, you're still going to have heat from that Generac generator. Actually, you don't need the electric because the Generac, that's the point, it generates electricity, right? But you might also want to have one of these large home solar-powered battery systems, like a Bluetti or a EcoFlow. The one I personally like is the EcoFlow Delta Max 2. I really like that unit. Get yourself about 160 square foot solar panel and you can run that thing and keep it charged up in the sun. So that's really good, and you can run small appliances off it. You can charge your batteries, charge your phones, charge anything that might need to be charged. So those are the kind of things I would look at. Now, what's a list of things that I think that people need to think about? Well, I've just given you most of them. Let's see if there's anything else on my list that I would recommend. We've talked about the gasoline, your water. You might want to have some water on hand. Now, if you're really concerned about the water, you can always store water. Now, water can be stored almost indefinitely after you have purified it. And there are formulas online that you can find that tell you how a few drops of Clorox, a few drops of peroxide in a 50-gallon water drum, and you're good to go. Seal that up, keep it away from air and light, and that water will keep for just about forever. But remember, a gallon of water weighs 8.4 pounds. So if you've got a 50-gallon drum, okay, that's going to be close to 500 pounds of water. You're not going to be lifting that onto a shelf, and you're not going to find a lot of shelves that are going to hold that. So it's going to have to stay on the ground. You're going to have to find a place to store it. They recommend 1 gallon of water per day minimum. I would recommend 2 gallons a day per person in your home. But if you're talking 90 days, that's 180 gallons times 2 people. That's 360 gallons. That's like 7 50-gallon drums. I don't have enough space to store 50-gallon drums of water in my home right now. So that would be impractical. 1 or 2 maybe, but a couple of jerry cans full of water wouldn't be bad for emergency purposes. Having some bottled water on hand for emergency purposes. But remember, a lot of that bottled water, the plastic chemicals leach into the water. That's not a good thing, they say. So think about the water. You might want to have a small water for purification system. If you have a well, you're in good shape. If you, as I said, if you have another water source, maybe a stream or spring on your property. I have a friend, you remember the video I did where I tested the solar-powered water filter at their creek. He's just down creek from that, downstream from that, he's got a spring that bubbles right out of the rocks, right out of the side of the cliff, right down into the little pool down there. So that's clean water. It's fresh. If you had that kind of thing on your property, that would be a good source of emergency water for you. I'd still probably boil it, but it's probably good water. So those are the kind of things I would think about doing in the time of a pandemic. You want to have masks, of course. You want to have, look, I'm not going to tell you that a mask is always effective. People argue that they're not. That's no reason not to use one. I'm not sure I like being required to wear one, but it doesn't hurt to wear one. I know there are people that argue that it does, but I'm going to say, look, I've never been harmed by wearing a mask. I'm pretty convinced that while masks don't keep you from catching the viruses, I do think masks can help to prevent the spread of those as people are coughing, or if they're coughing into their mask and not into the air. So people who are infected, who are sick, I think it's responsible of them to wear a mask to limit the likelihood of spreading that disease to others. But for those of us, unless we're wearing something over our eyes, these viruses can penetrate through our nose, through our mouth, through our eyes, a lot of different ways. So I'm not sure wearing a mask prevents you from getting sick, but it can certainly help you from spreading it to other people. So those are the things, like I said, I would think about in the time of a pandemic, the kind of plans I would make to make sure that I'm ready for the next pandemic, should it come along. And again, I believe that it will. Look, if you like this video, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. We had a goal of hitting 100 subscribers by Thanksgiving. We're already at 125, and I'm filming this on Veterans Day. So that's fantastic. We hit our goal early. I can't tell you how thrilling it is to hit a goal for subscribers when you're just starting out. Our next goal is ambitious. We're going to try to hit 250 subscribers by Christmas. So we're going to need your help. Tell your friends about the site. Tell your friends to subscribe. I think it's going to be a lot of fun as we continue on this journey together. I'd love to hear comments. I'm not getting a lot of comments on the videos, but I'd love to hear those, hear your thoughts, hear your ideas. I've got a whole boatload of ideas coming up. I'm going to do a video on some knives I got, so you can see those. I've got a special visitor coming to talk about something I'm calling Santa's Survival Stocking Stuffers. So I got a special visitor coming for that. You'll want to see that. So hey, in the meantime, be strong, be prepared, have a blessed day. We'll see you soon on Cowboy Survival.